Well, hello. So I'm here in this video to explain the process step by step to create the reflowable ebook from the Shakespeare play. Now we're actually going back to include this time in the whole book, so that is the introductory text as well as the play itself. So rather than just the play which we used for the web page, the website, we're now going back to take into account the whole of the book. So you can optionally go back to the original set of files that you used for the print production. That is to say, you know, the book panel, if you remember that, with the two files. I've actually got that on the screen now. As you can see, the book panel with the two files in it, the introduction and the play. Now you will need to possibly make modifications or include the new version of your play if you've modified that for the work that you did on the website, because the idea is that we actually need at least 6 images in the play for the ebook. And so consequently, if you went through the process of actually building the new version for your website where you included the images, then you will need to go to that version. So put that version in here. This is going to take a little bit of skill. Be patient with this because it's important to get those two files together in one folder and then rebuild your book panel by adding them in. The book panel needs to have the correct versions in, because that's where we're going to be constructing the reflowable ebook from there, as you will see. Okay, now I've got mine on the screen at the moment, so I've got my two files. The first thing that we need to do, and we have had some experience with this when we used it for the website, but we need to use the articles panel. And in the articles panel, we need to add the elements that we want to export to the reflowable ebook. You'll see what I mean. So I've got at the moment my book ready for print, and I've got to actually bring in all of the elements separately into the book panel. So for example, this is my half title. So I'm bringing this in to the articles panel. I can call this half title, although the naming of it isn't critical, but as you can see, I'm going to not include it when I export. So I want to make sure that it's explicitly told not to export. So that's what we're doing there. The articles panel, by the way, in case you can't find it, is literally on the window panel. It's the very top one. So you just find the articles panel, bring that in, and then you're doing a lot of dragging and dropping into that. So let's go to the next place now. Now this is my let's just move that out of the way. This is my frontispiece, and that is a group. So I've got to make sure that if I've got, for example, a caption with the image, then do put them together and group them together by selecting them both and then going to Object and Group, because it's the group that you want to plop into there and call it the frontis. And I do want to include that. Now the title page, of course, in some people's case it might be more complex than mine. I haven't actually got my publisher name on here, although I should have, but basically I just need to make sure that I select everything on this page. That is actually already done as a group, so I'm selecting that. It is a group, and I'm going to drag that onto the articles panel, and that is my title. Okay, next page. This is the imprint page. So again, I've grouped the things together. So if you do have different text boxes, group them together and drag that also onto the articles panel. I'm going to call it imprint. Now the table of contents is a special case. We want to include it in the articles panel. Call it TOC, for example, but we don't want to include it. Now that's a bit strange thing to say, but we don't want to include it on the page because the reflowable ebook actually doesn't make use of the page numbers from here. We will get a logical table of contents, which means it's either going to be a drop-down menu or a special page that's built specifically for the book, because obviously page numbers are variable depending on the size of the typeface that the user has chosen. So let's actually just add that in, but make sure it's unticked because we don't actually want it. Now here I've got another image, so I'm going to plop that in here, and I'm going to call it picture. Well, just picture will do fine. Doesn't matter. I'm adding that in there, and now this here. Now this is going to be variable for different people, however you've organized it. This, in my case, as you can see, because I'm showing the text threading, this is actually now all one text thread. So all I need to do is to drag this into here and call this intro. And I do want to include that obviously in my articles, and I therefore want to include it when I export. So the important thing to remember is that anything else inside the threaded text does not need to be brought into the articles panel because it's all part of it. So this image, for example, is anchored in the text and will appear after the word Stratford there. So I've just got to make sure that all of my images are anchored in the text, and then they won't have to be, we won't have to do anything else with them at the moment anyway. All right, so that's that. So I'm saving that document. Now I'm going to my book panel and I'm going to open up the play. Now the play is also, we need to do the same thing with the articles. Now I'm going to obviously include a title page for the play again. So it's like after the introductory text, Life of Shakespeare, turn the page, and there we find again another title of the play itself. So I'm going to plop that down into there and call it play title. Include it when exporting. Now the dramatis personae, again same thing, we're going to include that. Just call it dramatis. Now the rest of it is one long flowing text, a threaded text. So I'm just simply going to place this into my articles panel, and I'm going to call that play. Now that should be okay, except I just want to point out to you one issue that you might encounter, and I actually do have that in one example, so I'm just scrolling through because I know it's here. Now this one here, this image here, in my print version, because I've got a blank page opposite the beginning of scene 2, I decided that I wanted to cover the whole page for the print version with this lovely map of Athens. Now because that's not anchored in the text, it will just simply appear at the back of the book. It's not, we can't actually. The important thing is we can't include it in the articles panel because it's in the middle of this threaded text. You see how the threaded text is going around it. So we can't find a way, unless we anchor it, to put it there. So now the problem is that there isn't really any way that you can anchor something in front of an image, in front of text. You can't put it, for example, anchor it to the beginning of scene. We can only anchor it at the end of this text here. Now obviously there's no room here to do it. However, the way to do it then is to simply reduce the size of it, and as you will see later, that doesn't actually make any difference to the ebook because the ebook will give it to us full size anyway, but we'll come on to that later. And then what we want to do is to simply give ourselves a little bit of space on the next page by dragging that text box up, and then we can anchor this to this point. I think we just need to just put something at the end of this, because the problem that we have with this is the very next to this text here. I'll just check because I think that text there is stage directions, and that is correct. Let's just make sure stage directions, yes, that's correct. We may just need to put in another paragraph here. Oops, no, that's no good. I've actually deleted it. Let me just see if I can get my cursor into the right place and hit return. That's it. So I've now got some space to put it. So I'm going to now select this image and plop it into there. Something not quite right here. Let me just maybe I think it's maybe because it's actually that's better. I think it's because it was actually underneath the text box. That's the problem, because of the fact that we moved the text box so that the image was underneath it. It doesn't, as I said, it doesn't matter about the size. It doesn't matter about that at all. We can reduce the size slightly. Obviously, we are now sort of moving on to a slightly different version of the document because we've made that change. But really, that is only a very minimal change. What we will see, therefore, is that this will work in the ebook. Okay, so that was the only one that I really needed to worry about. So I've now got that, all of those documents now in the articles panel. Now, the next thing that we need to do is to look at our object styles. We need to make sure that all of the objects that we're using are making use of the correct styles. And the way that we do that is to make sure that they have their object styles applied to them. So, for example, if I select the Dramatis Personae and go to my object panel, object styles panel, you'll see that that actually is a selected Dramatis Personae. That's probably right in your case if you're using the original template. However, if it's not, make sure that you use the object style that's called Dramatis Personae. Then just dig into Dramatis Personae and look at the attributes of this and go to the export tagging and make sure that this now is set to be a section. So we want this to be a section. Remember, it's an HTML tag and we can give it the class name of Dramatis. That's that one. Now we do the same thing for the play. So select the play, select the object style, select the object style itself, select export tagging, change this or write in here section and give it the class name of play. That should be okay. We need to do the same. We don't need to worry about this one here so much, but we need to go back to the introduction and do the same thing for the introduction. So if we go now to our Life of Shakespeare and select this text, go to our object styles and we can use introduction. There it is. And with introduction, again, if we give this an object style, sorry, export tagging of section and the class name of introduction, like so. Now images, we're not going to worry too much about these ones here, but the images certainly within the play, which I'm going to bring back up onto the screen here. So these images as well need to have their object style set correctly. So you can see in the object styles panel, it is, having selected that, it is correct. We are using the scene image style. So you need to make sure that that's the case. So select an image, select the object style called scene image, then drill into scene image, look at the export tagging, and change this. Now it's probably div, but I would recommend that you change this to figure. Figure with a class name of scene image. That should do nicely. And then we just need to go through and make sure in our 6 images that we've got that these actually do have that selected. So that, again, you see that one isn't, so I'm just going to select scene image. You might find that it actually moves the image slightly. That's because that scene image object style does have you know, attributes to do with the positioning, and it might just shift it slightly. This one is fine. Now this one here is also, I just didn't notice, that's also another one that we need to anchor. So I'm going to just bring this down a little bit here, make it slightly smaller. I'm going to actually just bring some of this text down here, and I'm going to try again to put that into there. I think the problem is, like I said, let me just try this. If I now go to object arrange. No, it isn't that. It's some problem to do with the way that the next text is moving on to the next page automatically through the keep options, and so it won't allow me to anchor it to that point. So we do need to put in another paragraph there temporarily in order to make that work. So there we are. So I've got that in there now. Oh, and also make sure that that is scene image. That's already scene image. So as I say, I should go through and do all of these. There's another one. That one's correct. That's fine. And I'll just go through and make sure. And now here's another one that I do need to adjust. Sorry about this, but I am actually finding a few things that I need to make changes to. So again, this should come down a little bit. So here I'll actually bring it all the way down to here. Reduce this down. Now remember, Shift Command to actually reduce the size without changing the proportion. And then I need to put in a little bit of extra text there, and I said that is simply because the next style moves it on to the next page. That's why it won't let me do that. So let's just go through here, make sure scene image. You don't have to have scene image as your object style. You can give it another name, whatever you like, but make sure that you set it to be figure, to make the tag, export the tag as figure with a class name of, well, scene image. Now here's one here that again I need to adjust. So I'm actually going to do something slightly different here, because I'm going to take that out of there. And I'm going to, what I'm going to do, because I don't really need that second image there, and I'm going to bring this one down to here, and once again I'm going to do, whoops, I'm going to put this into here. So that means yet another text, and just plop that into there, make sure it's scene image. And we should be, we're kind of getting there. Well, now there is one thing that I need to remind you of. As you can see in the book panel, and I just want you to remember, the book panel has a little icon to the left of one of the documents. Now that little icon there, which you can see, means that the introduction is the style source. And that's quite important, because any changes that you do make in the play, and as you can see I did make a change to the scene image object. If you've made a change to that, for example that's now figure rather than div, what you want to do is to make sure that you do have the same style in your introduction, because when we make the ebook it's going to construct it from the styles that are in the style source. So what we need to do therefore is to go into our introduction, go to our object styles in this case, and I want to load object styles from the play, which is actually in this version, because this was the one that I was just working on. So this one here in the play, and I've got that wrong, so I just want to make sure that I'm looking at the right one. This is the 3rd of March. You can see how this can quite easily go wrong. It's just basically because I've been demonstrating this rather too many times. So this is the one that I want to go for, I think, 10th of December. No, what's the one that's today? Today is going to be this one here. So this one here is the one that I want to therefore bring the styles from. So I'm going to that, opening those up, and then I'm going to uncheck all, but I'm just looking for the the scene image, and I'm going to tick that one on. That's the one that I want to use, so click OK. So that's brought that style into the style source. That should sort out any problems there. So make sure any changes you make to your play those style changes need to go into the style source, even if you're not using them necessarily. It's just that those styles are used in the way that it exports it to the ebook. Yep, I think we're good. So I'm going to leave it like that. And just bear in mind that everything seems to be okay. I'm just looking over here on my notes to make sure that I've done all of that correctly. Now it is worth mentioning that particularly in the play, wherever you've got the act starting and also the scene, not the first scene necessarily, but the act, we want that to actually split the book. Now the way that the book works in the ebook is that it really is a box of files. It's really a website in a box. So every single section or chapter, if you want to call it that, will be a separate HTML document. And the way that we achieve that is to make sure that it splits at that point. So if I look at this style here, for example, for act, looking at my paragraph styles, what we actually have here in the export tagging is that this is going to become an H1 tag with a class name of act. It's going to have some CSS, of course, and it's going to include that class in the HTML. So it's going to say H1 class equals act, but also watch down here, it's going to say split the document there for the EPUB, split it there. In other words, when you export it, generate a new HTML document. Let's actually look at this one. This one shouldn't, unless you've got a particular reason to have the act on its own page, you don't necessarily want the first scene to split again, because then it will put that on a new page. So we should find under export tagging that that has an H2, first scene is the class name, but this is not clicked selected. So that should be fine. If I just go to the scene, in other words the subsequent scenes after the first scene, that one should start on a new page. Let's just go to scene, look at export tagging, H2 scene. Yes, it's going to split there. So that's already set up in the template. If I'm just asking you to check it, because if you've got something different, if you made a different style for this, you might need to go back and revisit this to make sure that you have it splitting, as I say, at the act and the scenes, not necessarily the first one. Right, so we are probably good now to at least make the first attempt, and we know that it won't be particularly good to begin with, but I will then explain to you what goes wrong and why it goes wrong. But we are now going to go to our book panel, where we're going to find the export to reflowable ebook from this little menu here, export book to EPUB, but we need to choose the reflowable ebook immediately. That's the first thing to do. I'm going to put it into here, into this folder. I know where I'm putting it, which is always good to have that knowledge, and I'm going to save it here. Now, there are a number of panels that we have to go through here, so watch this carefully because these settings are really critical. First one, very critical, very critical. You must choose EPUB 3. That's your first thing. Now the cover is literally the same cover that you used in your website, because you're only really working with the front cover from your book, and we just need to choose that. So I'm going to choose that image. I'm looking for it on my system, and I've got it in this folder of images, I think. Let's hope I can find it, unless it's in a different folder. This one here will do, I think. Let's just open that one. Okay, now the navigation, we haven't actually talked about the table of contents again. I do have a table of contents in here already, but if you need to redo the table of contents, you're really just redoing the table of contents like you did for print. The same one that's on the page currently that was originally used in the print version. So all we're doing is we're choosing that. We want to use a multi-level TOC style, and we're choosing that version of the table of contents. Now, as I say, we're going to do this once, but if you feel that you need to revisit the table of contents, then obviously you can do that again for the second attempt. The other thing is that we now need to tell it that the content order is from the articles panel. So we choose same as articles panel. Now the next thing is, how are we going to split the document? Well, we click on this little item here and we say that we want to base it on the paragraph style export tags, which of course was the last thing that I told you about. So looking at the export tagging, in there it said, okay, you're going to split it at act, you're going to split it at scene. That's, you know, there'll be other places as well, the dramatis personae as well, maybe, but we worry about that later. Okay, so that's the first panel. The next panel is we have footnotes in our introductory text, so we can turn those either into end of section notes or pop-up notes. I'm going to choose pop-up notes. By all means, experiment with this and have a look and see what happens. The objects, now the images, the way that it works is we want to use the ultimate best possible quality images. So you don't want to preserve the appearance from the layout, because as you saw just now, I did actually shrink some images down, whereas I don't want that version. I want the full version to be used. Use existing images for the graphic objects. We also want to be fluid. We want to be able to actually adjust the font size and therefore adjust the size of the images to accommodate. So we do this by saying that we want relative to text flow. You don't need to worry too much about the layout because we can change that in the styling later. But that's basically all you need to do there. We want the ultimate quality. There's no particular reason why we're anxious about the file size at this stage, but if you were creating a 100-page book with lots and lots of images, you might want to reduce down the quality of the images. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go for my full possible version. I'm going to go to my maximum quality, and that'll be fine. I'm going to now go to my HTML and CSS. Now, in here, we want to definitely include the classes in the HTML. We also want to generate CSS. In other words, we're asking InDesign to create CSS for us. We do that because that obviously gives us the foundation of our ebook, which we can adjust later. We want to include the embeddable fonts. We don't necessarily want to preserve local overrides, although it's quite likely that you don't have any. If you haven't overridden any of these styles, you wouldn't have these. But I'm going to actually untick that because I don't really want any accidental overrides included. Now, what we do want to do, however, is we want to include a CSS file that we ourselves can then subsequently edit and keep adding back to our versions, because we're going to do this more than once. We're going to go back to InDesign, I expect, and make some changes, and then we're going to re-export it. Well, if we've got an a CSS file that we can edit, then this means that we've got the ability to round trip back and forth between the ebook and InDesign and make sure that we maintain the styles that we choose. So we do have a CSS file. I've given you a copy of that. You will find a copy of it available to you, and I'm going to add that style sheet in. I've got that here somewhere. Let me just go back to the versions that I'm working on here. So I put it in here, I believe, but of course forgive me if I can't find it at the moment. Here it is, ePlay CSS. So I'm opening that and I'm going to include that. We're not doing anything with JavaScript. You do need to put in metadata and you do need to make this correct. I mean, ultimately you want to put in everything here. So I'm going to just give you the minimum at the moment, which of course is the title of the book, the creator, and I leave you to decide whether you want to put yourself as the creator or William Shakespeare. And then you can put in description and so on. Don't put in the date. I suggest that you don't put in the date because it's better if InDesign puts the date in for you, then it will actually automatically create it from today's date and then obviously simply adjust it every time you make the new version. Do revisit this before you finalize the whole thing and put in a description, a publisher and rights and subject and so forth. But at the moment we don't need to worry too much about that. So I'm going to hit OK. There will be some errors that will come up. That's because there are some CSS conflicts, but we don't need to worry about those either at this stage. So just don't worry too much about the errors that you get. And I will, we will try to resolve those. It's not really a big issue. Okay. Now it should technically open up the ebook reader on your device. So on the Mac it will open Apple Books, and I've got that open now here. So I've obviously got quite a lot of books in my collection here, but I'm going to open up this new version of A Midsummer Night's Dream, and as predicted, it's a little bit rubbishy to start with because what we actually have is all sorts of rubbish, at the beginning. It's combined everything together, the picture is there, then we've got the life of Shakespeare coming up here. It's all kind of a bit crazy, and you've even got borders around everything here, so there's quite a lot to sort out. But when we get to this point, as you can see, we've got the play and it's kind of reasonably okay. There are some things that we need to adjust. We've got images here, and when we double click on the images, those do enlarge up. And yeah, so it is kind of working at that stage. There are some adjustments obviously to be made. Let's just have a look at this. Okay, so yes, so we've got now to go back and revisit it. Now the first thing that we need to worry about is what's going on at the beginning of the book. And the reason that it's kind of jumbled up is we're not actually telling it where to break the page. So in the play, as I said to you before, act and scene is actually breaking it at those points, and that's correct. But here we're not actually telling it where to break. So that's what we need to do. So these things should all be in the articles panel. So when I select, for example, this, you should see little blue dots coming up here. And when I select this, this is the title right here. Now these things, therefore, we need to tell it explicitly what to do about the exporting. And the way we do that is to select the object, go to Object, go to Object Export Options, and then you need to look for an EPUB type that seems to you to be appropriate. I don't think there is one for a frontispiece, but it doesn't really matter that much. What I do find is that if I actually want this book to always start here, then I can actually include that. But what I'm going to do is just to go for something like I think we could go for an index. No, that's not an index, obviously. We probably want a it's not a dedication. It's a kind of a cover title or something like that. It doesn't really matter. That's not really crucial. There is only one part that's crucial, which I'll come on to in a moment. But what we need to do here is, because we want to combine the text and the graphic into one to make it a graphic, we then go to rasterize the container so that it actually rasterizes the whole thing. I'm going to turn it into a PNG. I'm going to make it custom layout so that it's actually in the center. I'm going to insert a page break after the image, and I'm going to set the overall width to be 100%. In other words, make me as wide as you possibly can, like so. Now I'm going to do the same thing for this. I'm selecting this, I'm going to Object, Export Options. I'm going to call this actually title or full title. Although actually, yeah, well anyway, we'll come on to that later. So I'm going to go now to Rasterize Container again. I'm turning it into a PNG because I want it to be transparent in case that somebody reverses their reader software. And I want to go to Custom Layout, and I want to go to the center. I want to insert a page break after, and I want to change this to custom width of 100%. And I'm going now to the next page where I've got the imprint. I want to then do the same thing again for this. I'm going to my export options, and I'm going, for this time we should be able to see the imprint down here. And I'm going to go to rasterize the container. Now this is actually a debatable point. If once we rasterize it, then it's not going to be text anymore, it's going to be a graphic. If you feel inclined to keep it as text, obviously that does mean that it's searchable. However, there is always a possibility that, and that is going to be affected by people's choice of font size. So if somebody increases the font size, that means your imprint page will also increase, possibly moving on to the next page. So in other words, going over to 2 pages. So if you're trying to sort of get a sense of this will only be on 1 page, then give it turn it into a graphic. Rasterizing container is what we do. So PNG, custom layout. I'm going for inserting the page break again after the image, and I'm going again to a custom width of 100%. Done. Now we're not interested in the table of contents because that's not actually going to show up anyway. This is yet another object, and I'm going to go to Object, Export Options, and I'm going to give this complementary content, titles and headings. I don't know what to call it. It's not really, as I say, that critical. There isn't really enough here to go with. But we can just go for a division if you like. That should work for us. And I'm going to go to Rasterize Container, and I'm going to make it a PNG, and I'm also going to do custom layout, center it, page break after, and then I am going to make it a custom width of 100%. Sorry, this is rather a lot of repeating here, but got to be done. Now that means that after that, we then go to this, The Life of Shakespeare. Now that probably will then appear at the top of the text because it's currently threaded with this text here. So it's simply going to be at the top. It won't be on a different page, unless we actually break this out of the text, of the threaded text, and make it into a graphic again. We're not going to have this arrangement. The text will be simply coming along before this text. You'll see what I mean in a moment. So let's actually look now. I'm going to save that. Let's look at the play again, because we've got to do the same thing with the same thing here. Although of course this is always going to be on the first page, but what we do want to do therefore is to go to Anchored Object. I beg your pardon, that's not what I'm looking for at all. Getting confusing myself now. We are looking for Object, Export Options, and we are going to a subtitle, I think we'll call it, and we're going for a Rasterize Container. Once again it's a PNG, once again it's custom layout, once again it's centered, once again we want a page break after the image, and we also want to make it a custom width of 100%. And that should be okay, because this will be on its own page, and so will this be on its own page, because these are separate objects which will split. I'll just check that though, because Dramatis head should be a export tagging h1 Dramatis head with a split document there. So that's going to split it anyway. When something is split with HTML, that kind of guarantees that it's going to be on the next page or start a new page. So I think we're pretty good here, although I think again there might be a few other anomalies, but we can come back and revisit it. So let's actually now try just do a second attempt, and I'm now going to export book to EPUB. I'm also choosing Reflowable again, but what you will find is that it actually saves the information, so you don't necessarily have to redo all of this information here. We don't need to go through it again. It will already know that. So I'm going to go in here now and just go for OK, and we'll have a look and see what we get this time. So we should see a third one. I think it comes up straight away actually in my case. So we've got the portrait on its own page. We've got this here. Now I'm not quite sure why we're getting this on a right hand side and not actually on its own. I might need to see if there's some way I can resolve that, but at least it's on its own page. That's the main thing. And so this is on its own page, and so is this, and then we've had the Life of Shakespeare. Now what we've actually got going around here is something that this border, we need to resolve that. But we've got the dramatis personae, and my dramatis personae is actually in a table. So that's another thing that I have to address. I need to work on my styles to actually remove these borders. But again, I'm going to come on to that very briefly in a moment. But you can see essentially we've got the basics of it now. I should also point out to you we have a table of contents, and the table of contents looks like this. Now if you're working on an earlier version of Apple Books, it won't work like this. You actually get a drop down menu. So there are two different versions of the table of contents page. It's either going to be scrolling like this against the cover, which I think is actually quite attractive, but the other type where you've got an earlier version, you're just going to get a drop down menu. But this should work. It should take us to the right place. Now, okay, and I think this is just the final part of this video, is we're going to talk about the styling. Now you remember that we did actually include a CSS file, and that CSS file has now been included in the book. Now the book is itself, let's actually go to my Finder, the book itself that we've just created, which is in this folder here. This file here that's just been created, this is actually a package. In fact, it is really very similar to a zip file, but obviously it has a different name. There's one or two things that are slightly different about it, but it is effectively a compressed file with all of the assets inside of it. Now, what you will find is that you have a program called I never can remember the name. It's called eCan Crusher. Now that program is on the campus computers in Tong, where you're working, where we're teaching. But you can download it, and I have put the link on Moodle for you. The important thing about this program is it will unpack that EPUB, turn it into a folder which you can then look at and make changes to. So I'm going to do that by simply dragging that onto here. Okay, and that has actually, I think I did the wrong thing there. Let me do that again. I'm dragging it onto eCan Crusher. There we are, I dragged it onto the wrong thing. There we are. It's actually, I already did it once, so it's asking me, do I want to overwrite it? So it basically makes it into a folder. So this folder is here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to quit out of VS Code because I had something else open there already. So I'm now going to drag that folder onto VS Code so that you can now see the contents of the EPUB file. over here. So here we are. So inside this folder, as you can see, are all of the HTML documents. And the one that's important to us is this one here, the ePlay CSS file. Now, just looking at any one of these HTML files, you can see here, this is the play, for example. You may be able to recognize this. You've got verse line, you've got character before speech, you've got prose, you've got stage directions. You've got all sorts of things in here. We've got images inside of a figure box, which is of course correct because that's what we did for the export options. We made sure that we had that in an object style. Here we've got song, etc, etc, etc. But up here in the head tag, you can see that we're actually linking to 3 different CSS files. And the final one is the one that we have control over. So if we want to edit this, and I will actually just edit one thing, because if we look here somewhere, we've got section play border style none. What we want to do actually is we want to do something similar for the introduction. In fact, I'll just look at the very first introductory text and you'll see that we've got a section with a class name of introduction. And what we need to do in our CSS consequently, because we haven't got it, is we need to effectively repeat this. So this is going to be, instead of section play, it's section introduction, and the border style will be none, because we don't want a border on it. So the border has actually been put on by InDesign because it always puts a border on a section, and we just need to turn that off. So I've saved that now. Now, here's the important thing. What we need to do is we need to keep a copy of this CSS file, because this belongs to us. We can actually keep adding this in every time we do a new version from InDesign. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually look at where this is in my Finder, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag a copy of this out of here and put it into my folder so that I can keep adding it in each time. Now, however, you might want to know that I have actually just, by doing what I've just done, I've actually changed something here. So I just want to now show you what we do to reverse the process. So we're now going to back to our Finder, which I've accidentally closed. So I'm going to go back here to my Finder, which is a bit annoying because it takes a moment or two before I can actually locate the right place again. So I'm going to my multi-platform publishing. I'm going to blah 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 blah, and I'm working in this area here. Okay, so what I need to do is that I've just changed the CSS in here, so I'm going to drag this onto my eCan crusher, so it will reconstruct the EPUB like this. The only thing I would say is the problem that you might encounter, and if I go now to books and turn that off, you see that I've actually got currently 4 copies of this. So what tends to happen is that you don't, unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily update the one that's already there, unless you do something like change the date and so on. So what we do need to do is we need to delete these. I think you actually have to do it one at a time, in fact. So remove is the word rather than delete for initially. So we click that little icon there and remove it or delete it everywhere. And then you should find that now if we open this one that we've just now created, we've now lost the border around here. So that's actually the way that it functions. So the next time that we export this from InDesign, we will be using the new version of the CSS that I've just edited. So when you make changes, you need to make sure that you keep a copy of that. So I think that's really as much as I can give you at the moment. So thank you very much.